and Housing and Environmental Quality Committee, the oversight of Volkswagen's defeat device, an update and implications of California to order. My co-chair, Chairman Bell, has been pulled from this meeting and he will join us forthwith. As the chairman of the Environmental Quality Committee, this issue is particularly alarming to me. One of the largest automakers worldwide has engaged in wide-scale deception to circumvent our country and this state's clean air laws. Late last year, I was in Paris and got a chance to meet some of the representatives from the International Council for Clean Transportation that help uncover this problem. California, and specifically our South Coast and Central Valleys air basins, has the worst air quality problems in the entire nation. Well over half of the state's population is breathing unhealthy air today. And much of this air pollution is due to mobile sources. Now, California's pollution laws, including stringent emission standards on mobile sources, have worked to reduce our pollution substantially. However, incredible challenges remain to attain healthy air in many regions of our state. In fact, even with 100% compliance with all the air quality laws, there are still incredible challenges to meeting increasingly strict federal standards for healthy air. We need every emission reduction available, and then some, to get to clean air standards in the next few years. Now, these affected vehicles spewing NOx emissions up to 40 times higher than allowed makes our air quality challenge in California that much more difficult and serves to undermine and negate other hard-fought air quality gains we've made over the years. Now, I look forward to this discussion and specifically to having a better understanding of how did this happen and what are the impacts and implications are for California, and what can we do as a state to make sure it never happens again. Now, I note that we have Senators Leyva and Allen here. Is there anything you guys would like to say at this time, or shall I convene our first panel? Ready to go. Okay, so I'd like to call up our first panel, including Richard Corey, who's the Executive Director of the California Air Resource Board, Aaron Livingston, the Assistant Chief Counsel for the Air Resource Board, Annette Aubert, the Chief of Emissions Compliance and Automotive Regulations and Science Division, and Todd Sachs, who's the Chief Enforcement Divisions for the California Air Resource Board. Thank you all for making yourselves available. And whomever would like to go first, Mr. Corey, please proceed. Oh, I was going to say that. They declined.
Thank you, Chair Wachowski, and good afternoon, members of the committees. My name is Richard Corey, and I wanted to start our presentation by providing some high-level remarks regarding what the Volkswagen situation means for the California Air Resources Board's efforts to improve air quality and protect public health. Following my brief comments, I'll turn the testimony over to my team to respond to the specific questions you asked us to address regarding our statutory authority, California's vehicle certification process, and the Volkswagen case. For nearly 50 years, ARB has successfully launched and carried out many groundbreaking air quality programs through technology forcing standards and innovative incentive funding. Our regulatory programs focused on automobiles are a fundamental building block of our air quality program and predate the Federal Clean Air Act by many years. In crafting the Clean Air Act, Congress recognized California's unique role by including a provision to preserve our independent authority, apart from the federal government, to regulate mobile sources. Today, cars are 99% cleaner than they were just in the 1970s due to ARB's regulations. The success of CARB's motor vehicle program, which is recognized globally, starts with our team of dedicated engineers and scientists combined with the ability to conduct our own enforcement and research testing at the Haagen-Schmidt Laboratory in Southern California. VW's admissions represent not only a violation of law, but also a breach of public trust. Through our enforcement efforts, VW will be held accountable for their actions. VW's actions also highlight the need to continue rigorously implementing our motor vehicle regulations and to improve our program to better identify non-compliant vehicles. Moving forward, we plan to broaden our ability to hone in on problem vehicles by using such tools as the Vehicle Onboard Diagnostic System, or OBD, academia, and sharing resources with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, such as by splitting testing demands. CARB will also continue to use the information we and others collect to help focus supplemental emissions testing of vehicles that are already certified, ensure on-road emissions mirror laboratory conditions, and will continue to develop other measures for detecting defeat devices. Here's a brief roadmap of the remainder of our prepared remarks. First, Assistant Chief Counsel Aaron Livingston will provide some background on ARB's statutory authority to regulate emissions from cars and trucks. Then Annette Hebert, Chief of our Emissions Compliance, Automotive Regulations, and Science Division, will discuss how ARB implements California adopted emission and performance standards. Finally, Todd Sachs, Chief of ARB's Enforcement Division, will cover the enforcement aspects of the VW case, as well as the next steps. And of course, we'll all be here available to answer any questions the committee may have. Now, to provide the legal context for our vehicle standards work, I'll ask Assistant Chief Counsel Aaron Livingston. Aaron.
Thank you.
Pause. One more. You got it.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon. Today, I will provide you background on California's and US EPA's legal authority to regulate mobile sources of air pollution. This will help provide important context for later in our remarks when we provide a deeper dive on the VW case. Title II of the Federal Clean Air Act authorizes US EPA to establish emission standards for new motor vehicles and new motor vehicle engines, among other mobile sources. The Clean Air Act prohibits any state from adopting or attempting to enforce such emission standards. However, US EPA may grant a waiver from this provision to any state which has adopted such standards prior to March 30th, 1966, if the standards will be, in the aggregate, at least as protective of public health and welfare as the applicable federal standards. As Mr. Corey mentioned, due to California's longstanding emissions control program predating the Federal Clean Air Act, California was and remains the only state in the country allowed to establish and maintain its own motor vehicle program. While US EPA sets the emission standards for new vehicles for the rest of the country, other states may opt into California's mobile source emission control program instead of the federal program. These states are known as the 177 states in reference to the provision of the Clean Air Act that provides this authority. California thus has often been referred to as the laboratory for innovation to test these innovative standards with these other states and later the federal government consistently adopting California standards. Pursuant to the authority granted by the legislature, CARB adopts and enforces emission standards for various classes of motor vehicles and other mobile sources. Our statutory penalty structure sets penalties per vehicle, engine, or part, and per violation of our standards and test procedures. That structure has changed little over the several decades since its principal provisions were enacted in the 1970s and now appears outdated. For example, while the statutes provide a penalty for the importation, offer, and sale of vehicles that have not been certified as meeting our emission and performance standards, the $5,000 penalty amount was set 40 years ago at higher than the then average new car price. This penalty statute clearly has not kept pace with inflation. Second, application of this outdated penalty amount is the same regardless of the egregiousness of the conduct of the violator. Together, there's a question as to whether the current penalty structure was insufficient to deter VW's conduct in this matter. But the penalties come at the end of a comprehensive CARB implementation and enforcement process that begins with manufacturers designing their vehicles to meet board-adopted standards that are set many years ahead to allow manufacturers lead time to engineer their products to incorporate these new emission control technologies. Then, before the manufacturers can introduce their products into commerce in California, they must demonstrate to our staff that a given model year vehicle meets our standards, an interactive demonstration process generally known as certification. Before and after certification, CARB has multiple independent avenues to confirm that the vehicles actually meet the emission standards they were certified to. To discuss these interactive and confirmatory processes, I will turn the testimony over to Annette Hebert, Chief of the Emissions Compliance, Automotive Regulations and Science Division, to discuss how CARB implements our adopted emission and performance standards. But before I do, I note that though both Ms. Hebert and later our Enforcement Chief, Todd Sachs, will be sharing quite a bit about our implementation and enforcement programs, including some basics on the VW matter, they will need to stop short of discussing anything that could compromise a resolution of the VW case, and I may need to interject and give them that direction. So with that, Annette.
Thank you, Aaron. Adopting emission and performance standards for vehicles is only the first step to attaining emission benefits. Implementation of those standards through our certification and use compliance processes is the cornerstone to building a successful program. First, let's focus on certification. Certification is a process by which a manufacturer must submit data and information to CARB to demonstrate that its vehicles will meet California's emission standards prior to being offered for sale in California. Figure 1 describes the major elements in the certification process on an approximate timeline. This process actually starts up to 3 years ahead of the manufacturer's plans to deliver vehicles for sale in California. The first element requires the manufacturer to describe in engineering concepts how the emissions will be controlled with both hardware and software strategies. Next, the manufacturers must put together a durability testing plan and demonstrate how their emission control system will be durable and control emissions for the full useful life of the vehicles. In some cases, full useful life for motor vehicles can be up to 15 years, 150,000 miles. The third major element is a disclosure and description of all auxiliary emission control devices, or AECDs. An AECD can alter the emissions performance for extremely limited periods of time under narrowly prescribed circumstances, such as to protect the engine when it is first started. An AECD may be approved by CARB if it meets one of 4 narrowly prescribed circumstances. If one of these 4 conditions is not met, the AECD is not approvable by CARB, and it is thus considered a defeat device.
Ms. Hebert, let me stop you right there because I'm following the certification process. So when Volkswagen had their smog emission system, they had to come before CARB with their proposal and explain to them the engineering and how it worked, and then your engineers and smog people had a review of that, correct?
Yes, they described the concepts early on, and then they put it together a durability testing plan and supposedly disclosed their AECDs to us. What they did not do.
Right. Normally, that would have been in a stationary sort of the typical smog testing or smog. You would have run the test as it was standing, right? It wouldn't have been the vehicle would not have been moving, right?
Right, that's how we certify vehicles, is in the laboratory over dynamometers, testing in the lab.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to make a disclosure of any devices that would defeat this would have come at this stage, right? In the certification process?
No, it would not have, because what VW did was they designed the defeat device to recognize when we were testing it in the lab, and therefore run emission compliant in the lab. So we did subsequently, as you'll hear later in my testimony, tested in the lab, and they were passing fine.
Please continue.
Okay. Okay, the third major element is the disclosure and description of all, I already covered that, sorry. So the DV device is not allowed. Keep in mind when we discuss the timeline and major actions in the VW case, how this plays in or plays back. Manufacturers must also demonstrate that a vehicle meets our requirements for onboard diagnostics, or OBD. OBD is software and hardware on vehicles that detect signals from the engine and emission control system to determine if a malfunction is present. When a malfunction is detected, the OBD system illuminates the check engine light and stores a distinct fault code that pinpoints the malfunction to assist repair technicians in diagnosing and repairing the malfunction. OBD is now available on every vehicle sold, not only in California, but nationally and in most nations. Several other elements must be submitted in an application for certification. The manufacturer must submit its final emissions test results, a statement of compliance, a description of how the vehicle would be designed to be emission control tamper resistant, copies of its emission warranty statements, and the emission label that will be applied to the vehicle. The approval of a certification application comes in the form of an executive order that makes the vehicles legal for sale in California. CARB issues over 3,000 executive orders a year, covering not only motor vehicles, but motorcycles, boats, lawnmowers, pretty much anything with an engine that moves. Before or soon after the executive order is issued, CARB may perform its own emissions testing to confirm the vehicle actually performs as represented in the certification process. Whether or not a specific vehicle is tested depends on if new technology has been introduced or there have been past issues with manufacturers' products. Now, what do we do after this certification process and the manufacturer's been given the right to sell in California? Well, in addition to certifying vehicles prior to being sold to California, CARB has established several programs aimed at monitoring in-use vehicles, and those are actual vehicles in consumers' hands, for continued compliance with emission standards. Figure 2 lists several of our in-use compliance activities. Starting at the 1 o'clock position, CARB will interrogate the OBD system of vehicles from consumers brought into our labs by implementing faults or creating situations where the OBD system should pick up a malfunction. We can also download data stored on the OBD computer and compare that back to the emission standard testing levels to determine if an issue was detected when excess emissions were measured. CARB will also conduct various field studies. In addition to performing literature searches, we may also outfit vehicles with onboard measurement devices and measure emissions while driving them on the road. CARB looks for inconsistencies between how the vehicle is operating on the road versus what was claimed during certification. Manufacturers must also do their own consumer-based vehicle testing to check for compliance and monitor their emission warranty claims. The results of both of these are reported to ARB. To ensure proper laboratory practices, CARB will also audit manufacturer laboratories to ensure emission data are properly collected and maintained as required to defend their reported emission results. Finally, and most importantly, CARB will conduct emissions testing in its own laboratories to confirm the vehicles are compliant with emission standards throughout the vehicle's useful lives. Testing can be triggered by any of the end-use program areas I just discussed. In the case of the VW issue, it started with field studies from Europe showing high end-use emissions on European models. This testing is most often done on actual consumer-owned vehicles. CARB has a process in place where we seek voluntary participation from the public by loaning CARB their vehicles for testing in our laboratories. In addition to giving the consumer a rental car, various incentives may also be offered to consumers for their participation, for example, a prepaid gas card. If a problem is detected or confirmed from any of the in-use program activities, the first step is usually for CARB to work with manufacturers to find a solution to fix the vehicles. This usually requires the manufacturer to undertake corrective action in the form of an in-field fix or recall, or issuance of an extended warranty to cover the emission control system. This part of the process has resulted in an average of 43 corrective actions per year since 2011. If a vehicle fix solution does not bring the vehicles into compliance, or if the emission standards or test procedures have been clearly violated, then CARB will initiate an enforcement investigation. With that overview of CARB certification and in-use compliance programs, let's move on to the VW case specifically. Figure 3 includes a list of our major actions to date. Published literature around 2012 pointed to some differences in in-use emission performance for some European diesel models relative to emission certification values. Later in 2012, CARB initiated a testing campaign at its Hoggensmith laboratory and invited West Virginia University, or WVU, and the International Council for Clean Transportation, or ICCT, to collaborate on a project to understand whether these differences in Europe were happening in North American diesel cars. As part of that collaboration, in 2014, the ICCT and WVU documented 10 to 40 times higher levels of oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, emissions from a 2012 diesel model year Jetta and a 2013 model year diesel Passat when operating on the road compared to CARB's results obtained through our controlled laboratory dynamometer testing. CARB then initiated a focused investigation of multiple VW vehicles equipped with 2-liter diesel engines using unique laboratory dynamometer driving cycles and/or on-road driving measurements similar to those used by WVU. CARB staff observed and confirms high NOx behavior during non-prescribed screening cycles. Multiple meetings and extensive communications between VW and CARB took place throughout 2014 and 2015 to determine the root causes for the high emissions that CARB observed. In the fall of 2014, VW provided its own emissions testing results and agreed that there was a problem. In early 2015, VW undertook a voluntary recall that, among other issues, was intended to address the high emissions. In late spring of 2015, CARB conducted confirmatory testing of the vehicle subject to the voluntary recall in order to determine if the recall was successful. Results demonstrated that affected vehicles remained non-compliant on some testing cycles, indicating that the recall was not successful. After CARB continued to collect additional data in its laboratories that did not correlate with VW's explanations of emissions performance, in August 2015, VW finally admitted that the 2-liter diesel vehicles used a defeat device that could detect when the vehicle was being tested on the laboratory dynamometer and would then operate in an emissions-compliant mode. If the vehicle detected that it was not on the dynamometer in the lab, the software would render several emission control systems ineffective or inoperative. These defeat devices were deployed on all U.S. 2-liter Volkswagen and Audi diesel models covering the 2009 to 2015 model years. The reported sales volumes for the 2-liter diesel engines are over 528,000 nationally, of which 66,000 are in California. Based on VW's admissions and ARB and US EPA's respective processes for noncompliance resolution, on September 18, 2015, CARB issued a noncompliance letter to VW related to the defeat devices in the 2-liter diesel engines, and US EPA issued a notice of violation. CARB's in-use compliance letter triggered a recall process in which VW had 45 business days to develop a plan to fix the vehicles. On December 1st, 2015, CARB received VW's recall plan, but it only addressed the 2015 model year vehicles. On December 14th, 2015, CARB received VW's recall plan for the 2-liter 2009 to 2014 model year vehicles. On January 12, 2016, CARB rejected VW's recall plans for all 3 generations of the 2-liter diesel vehicles. Simultaneously, CARB issued a notice of violation to VW for the 2-liter diesel vehicles. While VW was working on a recall plan for the 2-liter vehicles, CARB, US EPA, and Environment Canada worked together to expand testing to other diesel passenger vehicles, including those of other manufacturers, in order to determine if the problem was more widespread. As a result of the testing, it was discovered that 3-liter VW, Audi, and Porsche diesel vehicles were exhibiting higher emissions similar to what was observed in the 2-liter vehicles. VW has admitted to having at least 3 ACDs on the vehicles, which were not disclosed in certification, one of which is considered a defeat device. The affected 3-liter engines are found in 2009 to 2016 model year vehicles with reported sales of volumes of almost 105,400 nationally, of which over 15,850 are in California. On November 2nd, 2015, US EPA issued a notice of violation to VW, Audi, and Porsche relating to the 3-liter diesel vehicles. And on November 25th, 2015, CARB issued a non-compliance letter that triggered a recall process for the 3-liters. On February 2nd, 2016, CARB received the 3-liter recall plans, but they were incomplete. The companies requested and CARB granted an extension to March 7th, 2016 to provide additional information relative to the 3-liter recall plans. CARB did receive additional information from VW and Audi yesterday, but not from Porsche. CARB will take all the information that's been submitted into consideration as we further evaluate the potential for a fix for the 3-liter vehicles. This brings us to today. Before turning to our enforcement proceeding and next steps, I'd like to highlight in figure number 4 some changes to our certification and end-use compliance programs that we are implementing in light of the VW case. First, CARB has already begun a more in-depth review of ACDs during the upfront certification process, has increased interrogation of OBD vehicle systems when we have them in our laboratories, and is using CARB's specially developed test cycles when performing vehicle testing in our labs in order to identify potential defeat devices. Staff is also developing and investigating increased capabilities to evaluate real-world emissions by expanding the use of OBD data, using an on-road screening device such as a roadside remote sensing to narrow in on likely violating vehicles, and using on-vehicle portable emission measurement systems, or PEMS. These enhanced approaches should collectively help CARB identify problem vehicles and focus our laboratory testing on vehicles that most likely have non-compliance issues. I will now turn to Todd Sachs, Chief of CARB's Enforcement Division, who will cover the enforcement aspects of the VW case and next steps.
A couple questions, or would you rather?
Please, no, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chairs. How long has this onboard diagnostics review been in place? I thought I heard you say that you have a program where, with volunteer vehicles, and I presume you try to select vehicles, that you conduct some onboard diagnostics testing as these vehicles are actually on the road. Did I hear that correctly?
Onboard diagnostics is actually a system that's on the vehicles since, and I was looking at the attorney, since 1996 on light-duty vehicles.
But you're testing. Do you monitor what's on the road?
Well, that's a different piece of equipment.
Well, and I'm not the scientist, but
okay.
Do you monitor vehicles that have been manufactured, purchased, and driven on the California roads?
Yes, sir. We do monitor consumer vehicles.
And
yeah.
how long has that been going on?
It's been going on since the inception of our in-use program.
So my understanding, maybe I'm incorrect, is that there was one of these defeat device scandals that occurred in the trucking industry in 1998, where
Correct.
Truck diesel engines were rigged to try to bypass our emissions control systems. So if we did, and if we do, and have done on the road diagnostics testing with some sort of program and plan and goal and objective, then why didn't we catch this sooner if the Europeans were working on it for quite some time? ARB was tracking literature, and then it's not until August 1 of 2012 when you are coordinating, not doing it, but coordinating with West Virginia to evaluate these light-duty diesel engines?
Okay, well, a couple of clarifications. So the onboard diagnostic system has been present on vehicles since 1996. The onboard measurement devices, or PIMs, that I refer to is a fairly new tool. We only had the tool in our lab, I think, in the last 4 years, perhaps. So we haven't been utilizing that technology. It's still fairly new and still being, it's still evolving. Still being optimized, is still evolving, especially for low emission vehicles. So we haven't been deploying that. What we have been doing since the inception of our in-use compliance program is taking consumer vehicles, getting them to loan us to it in our lab, putting it in the lab and testing it in our laboratory over the required test procedures.
Well, how is it that Europe discovered it and we didn't?
Europe discovered on their vehicles that there was some high emissions. We weren't doing PIMS testing in our labs at that time. The Europe testing was actually the one that keyed us into there's higher in-use emissions than there is being portrayed in the lab. It's one of the evolving, since the availability of PIMS, this is one of the evolving tools that more and more people are using. So we did, as soon as we saw what happened in Europe, we did acquire some PIMs and started doing our own activity.
Well, given what happened in 1998 with the truck engine manufacturers, did the Air Resources Board put in place any processes and procedures to try to detect these defeat devices starting in 1998? And if so, what were they?
Well, one of the things was the revelation of these ACDs, is that manufacturers are supposed to reveal to us what they have or what they employ in their vehicles. The other thing we did is we have adopted an in-use compliance test, that a compliance mechanism where the heavy-duty vehicles are actually on the road and have to do this PIMS testing and show compliance. But it's all manufacturer-based for now, because as I mentioned, PIMS continues to evolve. We barely just started using on light-duty vehicles. We have not yet incorporated using these PIMs as part of the certification or a routine part of in-use compliance. That is one of the things we're thinking about doing going forward, to narrow in on real over-the-road emissions, not only for the detection of defeat devices, but to even get more emissions in actual use while in actual operation versus over just the laboratory testing cycles.
One more, Mr. Chair. Well, what's the limiting factor then? If we have the technology, given the fact that we have at least a track record in the trucking industry of attempting to roll around you all, what's the limiting factor? Why aren't we doing more on-the-road testing to challenge manufacturers and challenge the assumption that people don't lie, cheat, or steal?
We are actually now incorporating, and we're seeking to get additional PIMs very soon and we only have a couple, I think, right now we're using, but for instance, we've been checking all the light-duty diesels as well, as I mentioned. So we are stepping up that, and we're also stepping up the interrogation of OBD system data to the extent we can to look for abnormalities.
I mean, is the limiting, I'm trying to figure out what the limiting factor is. Is it money? I mean, we have been dealing with budget requests that move through your agency and others having to do with emissions and cap and trade and this and that total billions of dollars. So what does one of these PIMS things cost?
Well, $300,000 to $500,000, depending on what it's equipped with. But the other limiting factor to determine an actual defeat device or a non-disclosure of an ACD, one of the limitations is that it's thousands and thousands of lines of software code, and we don't really review that part of it. Nor do we have the resources to, but even if they would give us the thousands and thousands of code, if you didn't know what you were looking for, it'd be very, very hard to find it. So the best way for us to do it is to look for the symptoms, like we did, where we put it on the vehicle, tested in the road, interrogate the OBD system. If there's high emissions, but it's not telling you there's something wrong with the car, then something's not right there. So in essence, we're looking for symptoms without being able to really narrow in and find a defeat device embedded in the coding itself.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I'll won't interfere anymore with the flow of the speakers here, but I will look forward to having some plan going forward as to how we deal with this, and whether in 6 or 10 years this will not be 1998, it'll be 1998, it'll be 2015, and maybe 2025. So thank you.
Hey. I was following Senator Ross' line of questioning. I think the frustration I'm feeling is whether it's Volkswagen or whoever it is, people that are trying to game the system in order to beat our air emission standards in California. You've got to send a message that not only is that not acceptable, it economically can be very destructive to that particular automobile manufacturer who wants to sell cars in our state. We have health impacts, we have climate impacts and everything, so there were real harm was caused. And so it's one of these things on how much time and effort and how many hundreds of thousands of dollars do you have to play got you. I think we need to, I'm looking forward to the part of the discussion on the deterrence and never again, mitigation for what has happened, but also just letting people know that not only is that not acceptable, and it's not just based on our agencies running down every kind of possible way you can game the system, but that this is a business model that makes no economic sense for any other automobile manufacturer, let alone Volkswagen, to ever attempt to do again.